In recent years, Globovision has been the object of dozens of criminal investigations, administrative sanctions, and lawsuits by the Venezuelan government. During the last 9 months, government officials have filed in and out of Globovision's offices, without due cause, in vain attempts to find a pretext for levying sanctions on our station. Measures which could trigger the revocation of our broadcast license and put us off the air. In the last 9 months, Globovision has been the object of 5 different so-called administrative procedures for supposedly airing messages which, quote, justify or encourage acts of war or contributing to a breach of public order, unquote. The supposed facts used to support these allegations were based on statements made by guests interviewed on news or talk programs, not by Globovision's journalists or employees. In one well-publicized case, the government opened an inquiry with the intent of imposing administrative sanctions because Globovision, the only 24-hour news station in the country, was the first to inform its viewers of a series of early morning earthquakes that were occurring across the country. If Globovision were sanctioned, its broadcasts would be suspended for 72 continuous hours, and in the case of a second infraction, the revocation of our license would be final. But these 5 visits from Venezuela's telecommunications regulatory agency were not the only ones. Government officials of the National Tax Authority, the CENIAT, made a visit to notify Globovision of a fine amounting to almost $2 million for having granted airtime to NGOs to broadcast public service announcements. Venezuelan society reacted spontaneously to this development and made a public fundraising appeal to help pay the fine.
Este es nuestro aporte por la democracia, este es nuestro aporte por la libertad de expresión.
La intención de la gente de estar con la libertad de expresión y con el canal, pues con Globovision.
It's significant to note that in the wake of this widespread public support, as the funds were being raised, the government raised the fine to over $4 million. Since Globovision has always respected the law, it paid off the fine under protest, aided by the contributions of more than 400,000 families. Other fines and sanctions seeking to strangle Globovision financially have been executed during this year. In May of 2009, Globovision was declared subject to a special tax of $1 million. In this most astonishing development, the tax was levied despite the fact that in a specific clause of the applicable legislation, it is stipulated, quote, that companies that provide broadcast television services that are exclusively informative, musical, or sports, unquote, are exempt from the tax. This is precisely Globovision's situation, as it would be for CNN or BBC if they were to be broadcasting in Venezuela. This year, the Supreme Court ruled against Globovision on 3 cases that for years had been in a sort of judicial limbo. It permanently impounded microwave transmission equipment which had been confiscated from Globovision in 2004 and also required it to pay a fine of the equivalent of close to $250,000 for the allegedly illegal use of certain frequencies utilized in live broadcasts. This same Supreme Court has recently made available to other television stations the very same broadcast frequencies which had been reserved for Globovision, thereby effectively restraining us from expanding our coverage throughout the country. Globovision's chief executive officer, who should have been here today speaking at this gathering, has been a victim of a sort of judicial terrorism which affects all those who are connected with the media in Venezuela. His home has been raided twice, illegally. He was subsequently charged with criminal offenses, as was his defense attorney. A judge subsequently issued orders barring him from leaving the country, and did so without fulfilling the prior requirement to establish whether or not he was a flight risk. This is clearly illegal. Just last week, the judge admitted publicly that she had done so under pressure from a superior.
Pero esa decisión no estaba firmada. El problema es el acoso de la autora Venecia Blanco. Inclusive yo temo por mi vida. Ella tiene 6 guardaespaldas que hacen lo que ella dice.
Within the context of all these intimidating procedures, Globovision employees have been summoned to the Attorney General's office to provide sworn testimony in criminal cases, all of which is clearly aimed at coercing reporters and other media professionals into self-censorship. In a greater context, the government is simply trying to prove that Globovision has committed crimes and thus revoke its concession, taking it permanently off the air. Globovision simply transmits information, and it's being fined, sanctioned with administrative procedures that could turn into criminal charges for merely broadcasting public service announcements from NGOs, for transmitting verbatim the words spoken by a democratically elected governor, for informing viewers about an earthquake in Caracas before the government did, and for interviewing a journalist on a talk show. The restrictions applied to Globovision and the media in general are based on laws that violate both our Constitution and international treaties. For example, the Ley Resorte, the law governing what the media can and cannot do, enshrines the practice of censorship. The state can prohibit outright the transmission of certain television programs. The law also requires radio and television stations to broadcast 10 free minutes per day of official propaganda in prime time.
En Venezuela, el gobierno bolivariano, liderado por el comandante Hugo Chávez, continúa dando muestras contundentes de avance y progreso.
¡Viva la revolución! ¡Que viva! ¡Que siga! ¡Que viva la revolución! ¡Que siga! ¡Revolución!
Bueno, Chávez, yo te bendigo en el nombre del Padre y del Hijo y del Espíritu Santo.
CIRA es Venezuela, Venezuela de verdad.
In addition, whenever the government so desires, it can and does interrupt at a moment's notice all broadcast television and radio station programming throughout the country and inserts its own programming, known as cadenas, or chains. Since 1999, the president has chalked up 1,877 hours of cadenas, subjecting listeners and viewers to the equivalent of 80 days of non-stop talk and programming deemed to be of importance to Venezuelans, a great deal of which is clearly not a matter of broad national interest.
¿Es acaso mentira el deshielo de los polos?
The government discriminates against Globovision by not granting it any paid advertising, while other stations that follow more faithfully the official line have multi-million-dollar advertising contracts with the government. Furthermore, due to the recent spate of nationalizations, once a private firm is taken over by the state, we automatically lose its advertising. In order to really understand just how far the Venezuelan government will go to demonize the media, watch carefully the following clip of an interview which was carried by news outlets throughout the world. The version you are about to see, however, was doctored by the government. The voice you hear of our reporter interviewing Secretary of State Hillary Clinton is not his voice. The questions you hear him asking were, in fact, never asked. The interview is a montage, and it was shown repeatedly, as you see it right here on the state-controlled media.
In which democratic organization should Venezuela opposition look for support?
The narco traffickers and the gangs and the other elements like militias.
Which advice would you give us to make a cop and take it off of Chavez?
I think there are a lot of ways of doing that, but it hasn't worked yet the way that many people had hoped. But I'm one who believes that you should be very cautious about how you proceed because there are always unintended consequences.
Under these repressive conditions, Globovision staff and employees feel like they're on a countdown, wondering every day whether they'll have a job to go to tomorrow.